Chapter 1. Dust, cheap coffee, and the stench of desperate ambition hung in the air as Mia stared at the blurry photograph that shouldn't exist. 5 faces bathed in the eerie blue glow of their laptops exchanged glances across the converted garage. They'd seen things in Manhattan's forgotten corners that defied explanation. The wall behind them told their 3-year obsession. Newspaper clippings of missing persons, photographs of impossible anatomies, and red strings mapping patterns no one else could see. "Those aren't tree roots in the subway tunnel," Mia whispered, her trembling finger tracing the strange tendrils in the latest image. "And whatever made those marks is still down there, growing." Tonight, after years of chasing shadows for their struggling podcast, they'd finally caught something. Something that was now hunting them back. "Watch this," Mia said to the other girls. They became friends in their first year of college, and had come up with the podcast idea over Christmas break that first year. Her finger hovered over the play button. She looked around at the other members of Brass and Shadows before hitting play. 3 separate interviews. 3 people who don't know each other. The others leaned in as the video began to play. A man with weathered skin and hollow eyes stared into the camera. "They come at night. From below. Not rats, something bigger, stronger. They took Jeremiah last Tuesday. Just dragged him away." The footage then jumped to an elderly woman clutching at a tattered coat around her shoulders. There were eyes in the dark. Watching. Waiting. Smart they are. They know when you're alone. The final clip showed a young man, hands trembling, voice barely above a whisper. "Monsters. In Kips Bay. Nobody believes me." He didn't seem to know how to explain himself better than those simple words, as he just stared at the camera. Zoe pushed her chair back, the wheels squeaked against the concrete floor. "They're high? Or maybe hallucinating from lack of sleep? Or both?" Her skepticism was a shield she carried everywhere, the weight of it visible in her squared shoulders. In reality, she wasn't as much of a skeptic as her role in the podcast showed her as, but she had been doing it for so long it became natural on and off camera to ask those kind of questions. She felt it was important. "All of them?" Mia challenged. "Saying the same things? In different locations?" Donnie, their self-appointed leader, paced behind them. Her shadow stretched and contracted against the wall plastered with theories and sightings. "This is it. This is what we've been waiting for." The hunger in Danny's voice was familiar to all of them, that ravenous edge that made her words quiver like a predator spotting prey. They recognized it as the same desperate need for validation that had fueled their sleepless nights, hunched over footage in this garage, and their dangerous excursions into abandoned subway tunnels and condemned buildings. 4 young women with nothing but cameras and pepper spray, creeping through the graffiti-stained underbelly of Manhattan at 3 a.m., where even taxi drivers locked their doors and police traveled in pairs, had already survived close calls with drug dealers, territorial squatters, and once, a man with a knife who'd followed Mia for 3 blocks before they lost him. Their YouTube channel's modest following had plateaued months ago. Viewers were growing tired of watching attractive young women jump at shadows and find almost nothing. They needed something more real, and not just clickbait. Becca's fingers moved restlessly over her camera, checking settings that didn't need checking. She knew the equipment better than her own heartbeat, but fear made her fingers twitch. "Homeless people disappear all the time," she said softly. "It doesn't mean monsters." "Actually," Lily interrupted, not looking up from her screen, "there's been a spike. Look." She turned her laptop around, displaying a police database she definitely shouldn't have had access to. 7 people gone from the same area in the last month. No bodies found, and that is just the ones that got reported and looked into. They fell silent, absorbing this information. The only sound was the hum of their equipment, and the soft clicking of Lily's keyboard as she continued scrolling. "And I found something else," Lily continued, tucking a strand of electric blue hair behind her ear, her chipped black nail polish catching the glow of her screen. There's this condemned brick tenement on East 29th with boarded windows and a chain-link fence plastered with faded demolition notices. Been vacant for months, waiting for the wrecking ball. 3 of the missing were last seen within 100 yards. I think that's why it got reported at all, because the disappearances were clustered so close around that building. Danny's eyes lit up like she'd spotted buried treasure. That building. Tomorrow night. Her gaze swept across their faces, lingering just long enough on each to silently challenge any objection. Zoe snorted, spinning a pen between her fingers. Based on what? The ravings of people society forgot? We'll be trespassing for nothing. You saw the footage, Mia insisted, rewinding to the young man's terrified face. That's not drugs. That's fear. Real fear. Becca's stomach knotted. She'd seen that look before, in her own mirror after nights when dreams and reality blurred. If there is something, shouldn't we call the police? Danny's laugh cut through the garage like a blade. And tell them what exactly? That the city's most vulnerable residents are being hunted by something with claws? We'd be lucky if they just dismissed us instead of having us committed. She leaned forward, her shadow stretching across the evidence wall. We need irrefutable proof. The kind that can't be explained away or buried in some case file marked inconclusive, which is exactly how they've labeled every disappearance so far. Lily looked up from her screen. The demolition's scheduled for next month. If there's something there, then we need to go now, Donnie finished. Her conviction pulled at them like gravity. Zoe leaned back in her chair, unconvinced but unwilling to be left behind. Fine. But when it turns out to be raccoons or junkies, you're buying the drinks afterward. Becca's hands stilled on her camera. The police reports mention scratch marks. On the walls. On the... She swallowed. On the victims who were found. This was news. The others turned to her. You didn't share that? Danny's voice held accusation. I just found out. Becca's words were quiet, measured against her racing pulse. My cousin works dispatch. Said they're keeping it quiet to avoid panic. Mia whistled low. Now we definitely have to go. Zoe's pen clattered to the floor. Her shoulders, which had been squared and rigid, now curved inward. Wait, they found bodies? Not just people disappearing? The final word emerged as barely more than a whisper, her throat visibly constricting around it. Becca's voice dropped to a whisper. Yes. Her fingers traced an invisible pattern on the table as she avoided their eyes. They found him wedged behind the sanitation department dumpster on 30th. My cousin said. She swallowed hard. He said they needed dental records. Zoe's pen tapped a nervous rhythm against her notepad. Mia chewed at her thumbnail until the edge bled. Lily's fingers hovered motionless over her keyboard for once, her screen's glow casting her face in ghoulish blue. Donnie paced 3 steps, turned 3 steps back, a caged predator calculating. Finally, Donnie cleared her throat and pulled out their planning whiteboard, muscle memory taking over, as she uncapped a marker with a sharp pop that made Becca flinch. Friday night. Around midnight. Cameras, lights, audio equipment, and the small arsenal of tools they'd collected over the years of fruitless investigations. Lily would map the building's layout from public records. Zoe would handle the main camera. Mia would bring her recorder for EVPs, though what they were hunting now seemed far from ghostly. We should be prepared, Becca suggested, not meeting their eyes. For something physical. The implication hung in the air. They'd never gone looking for something that could hurt them before. Mace, Donnie decided after a moment. We all bring mace. They nodded, the reality of what they were planning settling over them like dust. They'd started Brass and Shadows as college freshmen, chasing internet fame through haunted houses and abandoned hospitals. Now, 3 years later, with a modest YouTube following and not a single piece of compelling evidence, this felt different. Dangerous even. Friday at 11, Donnie confirmed, closing her laptop. This could be our breakthrough video. Her voice held the practiced confidence that had carried them through 100 disappointments. Or our last, Becca murmured, too softly for anyone but herself to hear. But in the cramped garage with its walls of desperate believing, they all felt it. The cold finger of dread traced their spines, the sense that this time they might find exactly what they were looking for. And that was the most frightening prospect of all. Friday night had settled over Kips Bay. The fog had rolled in from the East River and began to muffle the city's constant pulse of noise. The 5 members of Brass and Shadows moved through the fog. Their flashlight beams cut weak paths through the mist as they approached the vacant building that was their target for the night. It stood 7 stories tall, a dark silhouette against the hazy glow of Manhattan. Its windows were boarded up and peeling warning signs plastered across its facade, just the last gasps of a structure awaiting its execution. There it is, Donnie whispered, her breath visible in the chill air. Just like I imagined. Zoe adjusted her camera, its red recording light a tiny beacon in the gloom. Looks like every other abandoned building we've been to. But even her practiced skepticism couldn't mask the unease in her voice. They paused before the chain-link fence that surrounded the property. A sign declared, demolition scheduled, with a date indicating next month. Below it, faded letters warned no trespassing and promised prosecution. None of them mentioned how easily these threats had been ignored by those now missing. Lily, you're up, Donnie said. With practiced ease, Lily located a cut section of the fence they'd spotted during their daytime reconnaissance. She pulled it back and created a gap just wide enough for them to slip through one by one. The metal was cold against her fingers, making her think of touching bones. Becca went last, her camera clutched to her chest like a shield. She followed the other girls up the cracked concrete sidewalk to a rear door. She had filmed dozens of abandoned places over the years, but none of them had felt so alive with wrongness as this one did. Remember, we stick together, Donnie reminded them. Any sign of security or police, we bail. But security wasn't what worried them as they reached the building's rear entrance. A plywood sheet that had once covered the door hung at an angle, revealing the darkness beyond. Mia traced at the splintered edges with her fingertips, noticing how it looked chewed and not just broken. Something broke this from the inside, she observed, and no one asked her to elaborate on what something might be. Becca's camera lingered on Mia's fingers as she traced the splintered wood, before she panned back to capture each girl as they slipped one by one through the jagged mouth of the doorway, their bodies momentarily silhouetted against the fog before being swallowed by the darkness within. Their flashlights cut narrow pathways into the darkness, illuminating a gutted lobby. Everything of worth had been pried away long ago, leaving only the skeletal remnants. Strips of old paint curled from the walls like dead skin. As they moved across the space, their footsteps bounced back at them from every surface, transformed by the hollow emptiness into something almost unrecognizable, as if someone else were walking alongside them. Zoe swept her camera in a slow arc, documenting the decay. Perfect for night vision, she whispered, her videographer's instincts temporarily masking her dread. When she activated the filter, their surroundings shifted on her viewfinder. The mundane horror of abandonment rendered into a ghostly green phosphorescence that made the shadows seem to writhe with an unnatural life. Donnie consulted the building layout on her phone. Residential floors above, maintenance and storage below. The basement is where the homeless were supposedly sheltering. They moved deeper into the building, past a bank of broken elevators, and through corridors where their lights caught dust motes, dancing like silent witnesses. The air grew thicker with each step, heavy with mold and decay. Lily walked close to the wall and suddenly stopped. Guys. Her voice was tight. Look at this. Their beams converged on the baseboard where her light was fixed. Long, deep scratch marks scored the wood and continued into the plaster above, as if something had clawed its way along the wall. Becca zoomed in, focusing her camera on the marks. "Those aren't from people," she said quietly. Zoe leaned closer, skepticism battling curiosity. "Could be from moving furniture during the evacuation." But she didn't sound convinced by her own explanation. They continued, now alert to watch similar markings that appeared with increasing frequency as they proceeded further into the building. The scratches varied, some seemed random, others deliberate. In places, they even formed patterns that almost suggested a language. "There's something else," Lily said, crouching down. Her fingers hovered over dark patches on the concrete floor. "It's wet?" Mia knelt beside her, sniffing cautiously. "Water? There must be leaking pipes somewhere." "Maybe," Lily conceded, but her flashlight followed a trail of similar damp spots leading deeper into the building. They proceeded down a corridor where the ceiling had partially collapsed, forcing them to duck under exposed beams. The damp patches became more frequent here, forming a path that Donnie insisted on following, despite Becca's growing reluctance. "The missing persons were last seen around here," Donnie reminded them. "If they came inside." The implication hung in the air. If they came inside, they might not have come out. 10 minutes into their exploration, they found what they were looking for: a narrow staircase leading down, its metal steps disappearing into darkness so complete it seemed solid. A faded sign on the wall read, "Basement, authorized personnel only." "This is it," Donnie said, excitement bleeding through her caution. "This is where they were reportedly staying." Zoe's camera light swept down the metal staircase, catching a gleam of something dark and viscous that coated the first few steps. Her boot hovered over the threshold, then retreated half an inch. "Watch your step," she murmured, knuckles whitening around her camera, as a droplet of moisture fell from somewhere above and landed with an audible plop on the third stair down. Becca twisted her flashlight's aluminum casing with fingers that wouldn't quite stay steady. The metal threads squeaked as she tightened them. "Check your equipment," she said, voice clipped professional. She swept her beam toward the stairwell and blinked twice. The light cut only 3 feet into the space before diffusing into nothing. She adjusted the focus ring, twisted it back, then forward again. The darkness still felt impenetrable. A bead of sweat slid cold between her shoulder blades, despite the chill. They paused, each examining their lights and cameras. Donnie took the first step down, the metal groaning beneath her weight. The sound echoed through the stairwell, returning distorted and somehow multiplied. The second step made less noise. The third even less. They followed in single file, each step taking them further from the world they knew. The temperature dropped with their descent, the air growing dank and heavy in their lungs. The walls that they could see glistened with moisture. It reflected their weakened lights in fractured patterns. Halfway down, the silence struck them. The constant ambient noise of the city, distant traffic, sirens, and the collective breath of nearly 2 million people, all had vanished except for the occasional background rumble of a subway somewhere nearby. All that remained was the sound of dripping water, steady and rhythmic like a malevolent heartbeat. They continued their way down when their lights finally reached the bottom, revealing a heavy metal door that was standing partially opened. Beyond it lay the basement proper, a labyrinth of storage rooms and utility corridors according to Lily's research. The damp patches on the steps led directly to the threshold, as if something wet had recently passed through. When they reached the bottom step, Mia froze suddenly. Her hand shot out and gripped Zoe's arm with enough force to leave a bruise. Mia's whisper came like frost. "Something's watching us," her pupils constricted to pinpoints despite the darkness beyond the door. The others exchanged glances. They'd seen this before in abandoned hospitals and condemned houses, how Mia would stop mid-sentence, head tilted as if hearing frequencies beyond human perception, moments before equipment malfunctioned or temperatures plummeted. They'd learned not to question these moments. And though none of them could see it, they all felt it, a presence, a hunger, and ancient patience finally rewarded. The basement opened up before them, their flashlight beams felt weak in the vast area as they probed the darkness. The light, as it was, revealed what felt like a maze of concrete corridors branching in multiple directions. Water stains mapped continents of decay on the walls, while rusted pipes snaked along the ceiling, disappearing into shadows their lights couldn't penetrate. The air hung thick with mold and something else, something like a musky animal scent that didn't feel like it should belong in an abandoned building. "Split up?" Zoe suggested. Her camera panned methodically across the space. "Absolutely not," Becca replied too quickly. She felt the weight of every horror movie she'd ever watched pressing down on her shoulders, warning her against precisely this folly. Donnie moved ahead. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness a little further than the other girls. "The missing people supposedly sheltered down here. Look for signs, belongings, makeshift beds, anything." They moved as a unit. 5 hearts beat in an accelerating rhythm as they ventured deeper into the labyrinth. The concrete floor was slick beneath their feet, damp patches more frequent now, forming trails that seemed to lead in multiple directions. As they moved through the halls and other empty areas, their flashlights revealed abandoned maintenance rooms, empty storage closets, and utility spaces stripped of anything of value. Lily paused at an intersection of corridors and consulted the building schematics on her phone. According to this, there should be a large storage room to the north. Might be where they camped. They turned in that direction, and that's when they heard it, a scratching sound, deliberate and rhythmic like claws against concrete. It stopped the moment their footsteps ceased. "Rats?" Zoe offered immediately, though her voice lacked conviction. Mia shook her head. "That's not rats. It's two?" She searched for the word. "Intentional." They stood frozen and listened. The silence stretched, broken only by their breathing and the distant drip of water. Then the scratching resumed, now from a different direction, as if whatever made it had moved while they were distracted. "Could be pipes settling," Donnie suggested, but her knuckles had whitened around her flashlight. Becca felt sweat beading at her hairline despite the basement's chill. "Pipes don't move." The scratching stopped again, then started from a third location. "We need to see what's making that sound," Donnie decided. Her ambition wrestled with her fear and won out by only a narrow margin. They followed the noise down a corridor as the scratching grew louder, then it abruptly ceased as they came across a row of small storage rooms. Their beams swept through the darkness, revealing nothing but empty spaces and more water stains. "There's something?" Lily's voice trailed off as she peered through her camera's viewfinder. She'd switched the camera to night vision, and the screen casted a green glow on her face. "I saw something move. Between the rooms. Something big." "How big?" Becca whispered, not wanting the answer. "Dog size. Maybe a very big dog," was Lily's quiet answer. They huddled closer together. Their backs formed a circle of mutual protection as they scanned the darkness around them. The scratching started up again. It was now coming from multiple directions at once, like a symphony of claws that seemed to surround them completely. "This isn't funny," Zoe said to the darkness, as if addressing a prankster. "If someone's down here messing with us." Her words froze in her throat as a shape darted through her flashlight beam at the corridor's end. For a heartbeat, they all glimpsed it. A creature with slick, matted fur that clung to a misshapen body. Not quite dog-sized as Lily had claimed, but impossibly large for a rat, with proportions that seemed wrong, as if assembled from mismatched parts. Twin pinpricks of light flashed as their beams caught its eyes. Something calculating lurked in that gaze, a cold assessment no rodent should possess. Before anyone could react, the creature slipped away, its body seeming to dissolve into darkness faster than their minds could process. "What the hell was that?" Zoe's voice cracked, her skepticism finally faltering in the face of undeniable evidence. "That's not a raccoon," Mia whispered. She echoed her earlier assessment of the witness videos. Her hands trembled as she checked her recorder, ensuring it was still capturing whatever sounds lurked in the darkness. Donnie took an uncertain step forward, ambition now battling with genuine fear. We need footage. Clear footage. Becca's heels scraped the concrete as she backpedaled, one hand fumbling for the wall behind her. Her throat clicked audibly when she swallowed. We need to leave, she managed, each syllable sandpaper rough. Her free hand made a frantic shooing motion toward the exit. We can't just film this thing like it's some ghost that'll vanish when the sun comes up. Lily's knuckles whitened around her camera. The viewfinder pressed so hard against her eye socket, it would probably leave a ring-shaped bruise. She hadn't blinked in 30 seconds. Her breathing was shallow and controlled, as she kept the lens trained on the darkness where the creature had disappeared. She recorded everything, just in case something dashed by again. None of them responded. They didn't need to. The connection had already formed in their minds, a terrible possibility too absurd to voice yet too concrete to ignore. Whatever it is, there's more than one, Mia observed. She turned slowly as the scratching continued its circular journey around them, sometimes retreating, sometimes advancing as if testing their reactions. Fear overriding their ambitions finally, they began to move toward what they hoped was the direction of the stairs, but the basement's layout had become confusing, corridors seeming to shift and turn in ways that didn't match Lily's schematics. The scratching followed them, sometimes from behind, sometimes from ahead, a persistent reminder that they were not alone. They finally reached a larger room that had several exits. The walls were lined with empty rusted metal shelves. Their flashlights revealed more damp patches on the floor that seemed to converge toward a dark opening in the far wall. That pipe, Lily said. She pointed to a large drainage conduit, partially hidden behind one of the shelves. It's been gnawed through. Curiosity momentarily overrode their fear as they approached it cautiously. The pipe, at least 3 feet in diameter, had indeed been chewed open, the metal edges bent outward, and from within came the sound of running water and, even more disturbingly, more scratching, deeper and more numerous. Danny's flashlight traced the gnawed edges of the pipe, and then followed a glistening trail that led from the pipe back towards the corridor they had just traveled. Danny's breath caught as realization dawned. "Look," she whispered, pointing to muddy paw prints emerging from the pipe's mouth, streaking across the concrete in chaotic patterns before disappearing into another dark opening. The watermarks upstairs, they weren't leaks. Zoe's camera whirred as she zoomed in on the jagged metal edges of the pipe. She captured the glint of saliva still wet on the torn metal. Lily crouched low, her lens following the trail of murky water that pooled and streaked across the concrete like a road map. Mia's hands trembled slightly as she panned slowly across the floor, focusing on a perfect 5-toed print pressed into the grime. It was too large for a rat but too small for a dog, with claw marks like something had scratched at the cement. Zoe's camera whirred as she zoomed in on the tracks in the water. "Jesus," she whispered, holding her thumb and forefinger apart to measure the print against her own hand. Mia swallowed hard. "These prints are the size of my kitten's paws at home, and my brother's pet rat would be tiny compared to whatever made these." As if in response to her deduction, the scratching around them intensified. It grew louder and more frenzied as their flashlight beams caught movement in their periphery. Shapes darted too quick to focus on, always just beyond the reach of clear visibility. "We need to go," Becca insisted, no longer caring about footage or evidence or YouTube fame. "Now," she insisted. As they turned toward what they believed was the exit, the scratching abruptly ceased, and in sudden silence was even more terrifying than the noise had been, like a collective intake of breath before an attack. In the quiet, the girls could hear something new. This time it was deliberate movement, and it was approaching. Not from one direction. From all of them. They heard it, a high, warbling shriek that was neither human nor animal, but something horrifyingly in between. Then, another. And another. A chorus of hunger echoing through the labyrinth. Right then all of their lights failed at once. The powerful LED beams that had been cutting through the darkness like protective shields simply vanished, plunging them into a suffocating blackness broken only by the eerie red recording light on the camera and the sickly blue-green glow of their digital watches, neither strong enough to illuminate what might be lurking just inches from their faces. "Turn them back on." Danny's voice cracked with panic. "Turn them back on." Mia's breath came in sharp gasps beside Becca's ear. Lily whimpered somewhere to her left. The darkness pulsed around them, just outside the beams of their flashlights and cameras. It was alive with movement they couldn't see but they could sense it. The displacement of air, the soft pad of something that was not quite right moving across damp concrete. Danny's fingers brushed against the small black remote clipped to her belt. The one they'd used for that abandoned factory video last month. The same video where they'd killed all the lights at once, right before Mia's fake scream. Her stomach dropped as she felt the depressed button beneath her thumb, still warm from her accidental press. She jammed the button with her thumb, and mercifully, the flashlights sputtered back to life one by one, all except for Becca's, which remained a dead eye in the darkness. The beams cut white arcs through the blackness, but they seemed anemic now, as if the darkness had thickened while they were blind. The light didn't feel like it penetrated as far as before into the gloom. It left the edges of their vision teeming with half-glimpsed movements, and the suggestion of glistening eyes watching from just beyond their reach. They came from every direction at once. Shapes lunged from the shadows, rat-like but grotesquely wrong. Too large. Too naked in patches, with skin glistening wet beneath sparse matted fur. Their faces were the worst part, elongated snouts with too many teeth, but eyes that held an intelligence that no rodent should possess. They moved with unnatural speed as they flowed over the floor towards them. Zoe screamed first. Her camera swung wildly as she captured chaotic glimpses of their attackers. One creature launched itself at her face and missed her by inches when she stumbled backward into Donnie. "Go!" Donnie shouted. She grabbed Zoe's jacket and yanked at her as she moved toward what she hoped was the exit. "Go!" They ran blindly, a tangle of limbs and terror. Their flashlight beams bounced erratically off walls and the fleeting shapes. Becca felt something brush against her calf, coarse fur and a naked whip-like tail. She kicked out instinctively, and felt her foot connect with something solid that emitted a high-pitched squeal. Her camera slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor as another creature darted between her legs. She didn't stop to retrieve it though. She couldn't. The primal part of her brain had taken control, and she continued to scream as she followed only one command: run. Ahead, Lily crashed into a stack of rotting wooden crates, sending them tumbling. The noise drew shrieks from the darkness, a feeding frenzy of sound. She scrambled over the debris, her camera clutched against her chest, the only one still recording as she instinctively protected it. A scream tore through the chaos. It was Mia's voice, raw with terror. The rest of the girls turned to see her on the ground. Something large had clamped onto her leg, and it was beginning to drag her toward the shadows. Mia's nails scraped against the concrete, leaving marks that mirrored those they'd found on the walls. "Help me!" she shrieked, kicking at the creature with her free leg. "Get it off!" Donnie and Zoe reacted without thought. They lunged back toward their friend. Zoe swung her heavy camera like a weapon, connecting with the creature's head. It released Mia with an enraged squeal. Its teeth left crimson blooms on her jeans. Donnie hauled Mia to her feet, nearly carrying her as they resumed their desperate flight. Blood splattered the floor beneath them, leaving a trail that their pursuers would have no trouble following. The scratching sounds multiplied, a frantic symphony of claws against concrete, closing in from behind. "The stairs?" Lily called from ahead, her flashlight finding the metal staircase they'd descended earlier. "Here." They crashed toward it, a broken collection of terror and adrenaline. Mia stumbled, her injured leg buckling, but Danny's grip kept her upright. Behind them, the creatures had organized into a more organized pursuit. They moved in formation with a terrible coordination that spoke of a shared purpose. Zoe reached the stairs first, taking them two at a time, her camera still somehow recording over her shoulder. The metal steps rang with their pounding feet. Each impact sent vibrations through the stairwell that seemed to call more creatures from the darkness below. Halfway up, Becca glanced back. Dozens of pairs of eyes reflected their fading lights, gathered at the base of the stairs. The creatures milled there, shrieking, but they did not follow for some reason. Territory probably, she realized through her panic. They had established boundaries. Hunting grounds. With no thought to what kept them on that side of their boundaries, they burst through the door at the top of the stairs and slammed it shut behind them. There was no lock, no way to secure it, and they didn't even stop to try. The ground floor welcomed them, with a silvery glow that felt blinding after the ink-black horror of the basement. The moonlight shone through the broken boards on the windows, casting zebra-striped shadows across the debris-strewn floor. Dust motes danced in these pale beams, and the girls could now make out the jagged edges of fallen plaster, upturned furniture, and the gaping holes in the floorboards that might have swallowed an unwary foot. The air here tasted different too as well, less damp, less rotten, and carrying the promise of escape. The basement door stood silent, a thin barrier between them and what lurked below. Danny's eyes locked with Zoe's, then Becca's, no words needed. They bolted. Chair legs snagged ankles. Exposed nails clawed at sleeves. A ceiling beam, partially collapsed since they'd first passed beneath it, now hung low enough to clip Lily's forehead as she ducked a half-second too late. The hallway they'd strolled down an hour ago stretched before them like a gauntlet, each shadow deeper, each creak louder. Lily tripped over a broken chair, sprawling face first onto the dirty floor. Her camera skidded away but remained intact, its light still glowing red. She scrambled to retrieve it, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it again. Behind them, the basement door exploded off its hinges. The creatures had abandoned their territorial boundaries, driven by the scent of Mia's blood. Their shrieks echoed through the hallway, a chorus of hunger that seemed to vibrate the very air around them. "They're coming up," Mia gasped, clutching her bleeding leg as she limped forward. They ran faster, each breath like fire in their chests, muscles burning in protest. Mia stumbled between them, a different hand always there to catch her before she fell. When Becca's foot punched through a rotted floorboard, splinters clutched at her ankle. She yanked free with a wet tearing sound, barely registering the warm trickle down her heel. Survival first. Pain later. The lobby appeared ahead, the exit, the night, the world they knew just beyond. Zoe hit the door first, throwing her weight against it, but it had swung shut after their entry, and now it resisted her push. "It's stuck," she cried, shoving harder. Behind them, the shrieking grew closer. The scratching sounds echoed from the corridor behind them. Donnie and Becca slammed into the door alongside Zoe, their combined weight finally forced it open enough for them to escape. They spilled out into the night air, dragging Mia with them. Lily brought up the rear, still filming over her shoulder. They ran without direction, without thought, simply away. Away from the building, away from the creatures, away from the reality they couldn't process. They didn't stop when they reached the street, or when they crossed it, or when they passed bewildered late-night pedestrians who stared at their blood-spattered clothes and terror-stricken faces. Only when they were more than a couple of blocks away, in the relative safety of a brightly lit all-night diner, did they finally collapse into a booth, gasping and trembling. "Is everyone okay?" Donnie asked, though the answer was obvious. Mia's jeans were torn and soaked with blood from the puncture wounds that matched no dog bite any of them had ever seen. Becca's ankle was scraped raw from when her foot went through the floorboards. Zoe's knuckles were split from her desperate attack on the creature. And all of them bore minor scratches and bruises, badges of their narrow escape. Their equipment had fared no better. Becca's camera was gone, abandoned in the basement. Zoe's was dented from being used as a weapon, its housing cracked. Mia's audio recorder had a broken screen. Only Lily's camera remained fully functional, clutched in her trembling hands like a talisman. "I got it," she whispered, her eyes were wide with shock. "I got it on film." In the harsh fluorescent light of the diner, being surrounded by normal life and normal people, what they'd seen seemed impossible. But the blood was real. The wounds were real. And somewhere on Lily's camera was proof that the monsters were real too. What were those things? Zoe asked, her skepticism finally permanently shattered. No one answered. No one could.